Okay, so, Cruelty Squad. When I first saw this game, I really didn't know what to think of it, but when I finally started playing it, it made a lot more sense, gameplay-wise. It's a game that takes something like Deus Ex or Hitman and throws a lot of mismatched shapes and colours together in a low-poly format and adds a stock market to it and fishing. You end up with, well, something like this at the end of the day, and yet, beyond the surface, beyond the ugly but weird and uncanny surface of the game, is one of the most in-depth games that I've played in a long time, with tons of secrets to discover and a multitude of ways that you can break the game and clear a task. Like other immersive sims, you can approach the missions however you want, but it's a game that can also be challenging, and you can't abuse the quick save system that you're used to in other games. You can, however, edit the save file if you don't mind being a cheat. At any rate, what also sets this game apart is its unique setting, which is chock full of uncanny and deformed designs that have their own place in the world and makes you feel like you really shouldn't be there. Now, there are tons of games out there with their own display of weird and unusual worlds, full of different colours, different people, different model designs and ways of playing, but what these games and Cruelty Squad have in common are that they all go off the beaten path, quite literally. What sense that can be made in the world gets muffled by the senselessness of everything else added to it. They're all weird, zany, and psychedelic in their own way. Some of these games are available now, have a demo, or have yet to have one and is still ongoing in development. But these games here I felt ticked some boxes, not all of them but some, while being fundamentally different from each other, gameplay-wise, as well as some being immersive sims, or just other genres entirely. And these games might be up your alley. For this video though, the focus will be more on presenting games that also have a weird and trippy setting, like Cruelty Squad, or just something with a similar vibe to it. And on top of that, I may also present some other games for other reasons too. I'll go over each title briefly and may go in depth over some of them in the future. So stay tuned for that. Here we go. Number 1, OK Normal. So this is a third-person platformer game developed by 98DMake, a YouTuber and developer who is known for making animations of games in PS1 style, basically demakes of existing games, and it also developed a 5-minute horror game called September 1999. But OK Normal is a game that gives you more in comparison because of the variety of levels, and the chunks of dialogue that you get from the cloud that follows you. Part of what makes this game great too is how closely it emulates the capabilities of the PS1, from a fine texture mapping, vertex snapping, low poly visuals. The only exception, of course, is the higher frame rate. The game's atmosphere is always unsettling. In each and every level that was made in this game, there's always something wrong, especially in the beginning. OK Normal is more of an abstract experience, but one that is memorable in its own way, and has a lot of cool designs and environments going for it, and it's a cheap game as well, so I think you'll find something to enjoy here. Number 2, Neko Yume. Speaking of cats, you will find plenty of them here, just not in the way that you would normally see one. Neko Yume is an exploration game developed by Modus Interactive and looks to be a combination of games like LSD Dream Emulator, which we'll get to in a minute, and Yume Nikki, a cult classic of the RPG maker scene. This is a demo that was part of the Haunted PS1 demo discs that you can find on itch.io, but can also be played separately. The goal is to find 4 cats, but it's more complicated than it sounds because of the randomization of the levels, and how each time you go through them there's always something else to discover. You can explore, get transported elsewhere, come back later, and like I said, it won't be the same, but there's always something different to see, and the level of visual imagery is really impressive and closely emulates the experience that you would find in LSD Dream Emulator. The game itself doesn't really have a story, but it's more or less something you play when you want something that's just more for exploration, basically. If you liked LSD Dream Emulator, then you'll like this game too, which goes into our third game, LSD Dream Emulator. Now, when it comes to games with a more surreal and abstract tone, this is a game that has made its own mark, even in spite of never reaching outside of Japan at the time of its release, and has been an influential game in the indie scene for those that wanted to make more abstract and experimental games. It would eventually be discovered on the internet by other people and has become a cult classic since. Now, From the point of view of the developer, it's more of a art form rather than just simply a game. He wanted to use the PS1 as a medium to create artistic expressions, basically, and LSD Dream Emulator is such a game. Conceived by the developer himself, Osamu Sato, from Asmic Ace Entertainment, who had decided to make something, like I said, other than just simply a game made to entertain, but something that could transcend beyond that form and just become more of like an art form. And what you have here is a myriad of surreal-like worlds that shift as the days pass, full of secrets and interesting characters that roam about the many places you'll visit. And characters, I mean, just people that exist within the dreamlike worlds. You can't really talk to them, but you can certainly see what they're doing. Finding a physical copy of the game will be difficult and very expensive, but online you'll be able to grab it more easily. And with something like DuckStation, in case you don't have a working PS1, you'll be able to enjoy this game regardless. And to top it all off, this game was a reminder too that in all of those years of games being released for the platform, the West had missed out on so much up until, the prominence of the internet, where we discovered an entire library of games that they never knew existed over in the East. And this is one of the most unique and interesting titles for the bunch. Number 4, Tykos Dying Together. Now here's a GZ Doom that you probably haven't heard of, and one that will probably make you feel like you've just installed a virus. It's a game developed by Walked Out Nemans that wanted to make a game that constantly attacked you with border changes to the screen, fonts and pop-ups, all the while trying to make sense of where you are and why. You have encounters with NPCs and a phone to use, some platforming sections, and a world that makes little sense at all, which is kind of the point of a lot of these games, where it's down to interpretation and what you believe. Even still, if you don't mind the odd displays of textures and endless smiles, with a character that looks like a cartoon character from the 90s always being in front of you, then definitely check this game out. And to top it off, I'll add a link to the developer's itch.io page in the description so you can check out his other games. Number 5, Hypnagogia. While we're still on the LSD train, I have another one that is similar but has more visual detail to it. Hypnagogia Boundless Dreams, developed by Soda is a game that takes LSD Dream Emulator and other platformers like, say, Spyro or Banjo-Kazooie to an extent, and forces them into a first-person camera with endless dream worlds. As a result, you have a game like this, and it's one with an actual story as well. Your character in the dream world witnesses the dream crystal getting destroyed. This results in multiple shards going across different worlds. You, the character, have to go and find them and restore the dream crystal, and basically bring everything back to normal, or as normal as a dream world allows. In any event, you'll be jumping on hexagonal platforms, talking to different NPCs that can either be friendly or non-caring about your presence. The soundtrack is beautiful, and environments even more so. It's nice to have a game like this that's not too detailed but not too bland either. It's artistically diverse in its worlds, and they all have something different to offer. There's also a demo available if you want to try it out, and it gives you enough to see whether it's up your alley or not. Definitely look forward to playing this more in the future. Number 6, Juice Galaxy, an open world game developed by Fish Liquor. Now, this is going to be a difficult game to explain, and it's not even finished either. But think of it like this. Take Dark Souls and apply physics-based gameplay to it. Replace the dark medieval world and give the game Play-Doh-like enemy models and a low-poly world with zany colors to it, and make it free. Honestly, it's the kind of game that will make more sense when you actually play it. But for something that's free, the game is incredible. It's full of different characters with very weird designs and personalities, a ton of weapons, and some serene environments to boot that seem to stretch to the infinite, and also increases the size of the enemies drastically. Your character is highly customizable as well, same goes with the difficulty system that you can modify. Enemies are also physics-based, and the gameplay revolves around moving like a ragdoll. It's weird to control at first, but you get used to it pretty quickly. However, this is the sort of game that you're not going to make much sense of at first, but will probably have a blast with regardless. It gives you a lot to do, and even has Dark Souls style boss fights and a sword from Berserk. The best part is, like I said, the game is not even finished yet, and I cannot wait to see what else gets added into the game. So far, this is probably the trippiest free game that I found on Steam so far that's also fun to play. Definitely play it while baked. Number 7, Soil. So this one here is more minimalistic in comparison, but I wanted to put this in anyway for its unique way of playing the game, other than just for having weird themes and visuals this time around. Essentially, it's like a colony management game, but the inhabitants here are trying to break out constantly, and quite literally, you use your entire keyboard to stop them. See all the nodes on the soil? They are each tied to a button on the keyboard. Pressing 2 keys together will create a wire that will hold them back. But as the timer progresses, this gets more difficult as they start to evolve, and as some of them get away as well and you have less keys to utilize. You also have to quickly change patterns in order to keep the rest in bay. When you see them try and break out of their hole, you can also press the assigning key to it, and it should hold it there temporarily. It's a simple but very tricky game to play, but might be worth looking into for someone that wants to get a game that's different in a way and will get their reflexes going in a unique sense. Visually though, there's not a lot to see there. However, the animations that do go off are pretty impressive and even give off a 90s CGI vibe to it. Something like this I would like to see on a larger scale and with more level variety, but what's already there is still pretty good and I would recommend it. Number 8, Vangers. Speaking of unique games, here's another one, but one from 1998, developed by KD Labs from Russia, by people that wanted to make a top-down racing game with some RPG elements, and with dynamic open worlds that have seasonal cycles and voxel-based graphics that allow you to manipulate the terrain. Out of all of the racing games that I've ever played, I've never played anything at all like this. Vangers' story is set in the far future where humanity has pushed their luck in conquering worlds, thanks to the infinite mind that allowed them to create passages leading to a chain of worlds owned by them. However, at one point they would encounter another insectoid-like species that would then cause a conflict with them, and the humans would be losing badly. As a result, a fusion of DNA would occur between the two species, transforming them both entirely into a new one, which would then lead to this abstract and weird setting that we now have, full of bug-like characters, and a lot of them being part human. You just can't tell from the appearance of them, basically. The loop of Vangers is that you do deliveries, you find hideouts, engage with other cars and races in combat, also engage in the activities activated by the cycles, all the while trying to make your way through to the other worlds, as well as getting new rides and weapons. The first hour of the game is torturous, however. You will be spending a considerable amount of time learning how to drive and how the world works, but if you can get past that threshold, then you'll experience not only the most unique racing game ever made, but also one of the most interesting experiences out there today. Number 9, Portland 2024, a jam game for the LSD Jam made by Superhunt. There's not a great deal here to see, but it does have some visual imagery similar to Cruelty Squad, and on the developers page there are other games that also have a similar look to it. There's a few levels and weapons to play around with, but the enemy variety is non-existent. There's only like one enemy type that you fight. You explore the level, shoot the enemies, and find the exit wall. This game is more or less an exercise in how you can replicate visuals similar to Cruelty Squad and not much more. Those expecting a fully fleshed out game will be disappointed, but I would recommend checking it out for visual inspiration as well as the other games that this person has made. However, if this game was worked on more, it could become something with more potential. But to quickly showcase another project from the developer, Mindbenders X is another very short game that also has Cruelty Squad style visuals, this one more so than the other one, and even has a border, made in an effort to learn Godot, the same engine that Cruelty Squad was made with. If you do try it, make sure it stays windowed. Full screen doesn't make the game's border stretch out. Number 10, Gore 3. Speaking of short games that had potential, here's another one. Gore 3, developed by Fantasy Order Simulations, another game that has similar visuals to Cruelty Squad, but is significantly shorter and more annoying difficulty-wise. Enemies hit you in the blink of an eye, and your weapon has to account for time and distance since it's a projectile. It has 3 levels with a few enemies that have different attacks. Since it's nearly impossible to not take damage, you're encouraged to take things slower here and pick off the targets gradually. Other than that, you won't get much more other than the ability to pee. There is a game released by the same person called Astra that expands on the lore of Gore 3, if you care about that sort of thing anyway. Again, I would see this as more of a visual reference if your goal is to make your game visually similar to Cruelty Squad. Number 11, Electric Highways. The build engine was something that was a powerhouse in its own right back in the 90s. Nowadays, it doesn't really get used much anymore. Instead, people have been using the eDuke32 source port to make total conversion mods and games based off of Duke Nukem 3D. Electric Highways is one such example, developed by Decayed. In it, you play as a VR engineer living in a world where people have become fixated with the usage of VR, and so the character decides to go in one last time, leading you to a number of surreal and strange virtual places. You navigate the area, look for terminals, then an item that will unlock the gate for you, so you can move on to the next area, all the while having a timer on you. If you are a follower of the GZ Doom source port, then eDuke32 is somewhat similar. Although it doesn't get as many projects in comparison, games like this show what eDuke32 was capable of at the time, and those capabilities would be extended to games like Iron Fury and AWOL. It has a nice soundtrack that fits each level has its own vibe and atmosphere, and the gameplay loop is relatively simple. If you're looking for a free exploration game that uses an old engine, then Electric Highways is one game to look at. Number 12, Sauna 2000. Itch.io is a great platform for developers getting their feet wet. It has a range of amateur to professionally made projects that anyone can enjoy, but it is chock full of horror games, making it the most popular genre on the platform. However, this also means that there's so many of them that it's hard to find the best ones. There are, however, some outliers that do break the mold in their own ways and make them stand out. Sauna 2000 by Moya Horror is one example. You play as presumably a Finnish person who manages their own personal sauna during the midsummer. Everything seems normal, drinks are cold, and there's plenty of wood and water. But one thing after another, more strange things begin occurring. Before you know it, you're now in a surreal horror comedy story that starts to gradually become more and more unhinged, blurring the lines between reality and nightmares. It's a game that is still ongoing in development, but what's already there looks really promising, and I can't wait to see what the final product comes out as. Number 13, Dreamwild. A fast-paced styled arcade shooter developed by Fading Club that features a handful of psychedelic-based worlds, pre-rendered backgrounds in the hub area that you'd see on the PS1, challenging combat, and an awesome soundtrack. At first I had trouble with the game's difficulty, but that was because they didn't make use of the game's strafing mechanics that enabled higher levels of speed, and misunderstandings how the infinite ammo system works. The maps are massive, with enemies that are always on your tail, but once you get the rhythm of the game, it becomes a fun and challenging game that feels different from other fast-paced shooters. Has an interesting story with some wacky characters, and the art style is pretty unique as well, if you don't mind the dithering. Has upgrades that you can use to make traversing the levels much easier. The goal is to get 2 keys that then unlock a portal to another map. You can, however, keep going through the other portals that go on an infinite loop. The story itself revolves around the Dreamwilds, which is like layers upon layers of worlds that have ended up in this entire plane of existence, including you, a knight who is then tasked with rooting out the source of the evil plaguing the Dreamwilds and the inhabitants. For the asking price and for how it plays, it's definitely worth picking up, and I would highly recommend this. Number 14, Hylics. Now here is the strangest RPG Maker game that I've seen so far. Hylics, developed by Mason Lindroff, a short but abstract experience that sets itself apart from the RPG Maker scene, where you have a lot of games that just kind of blend together, looking like a typical JRPG classic game basically. Sure though, you do have some other exceptions, games like Fear and Hunger, Yume Nikki, and Omori, but they're not the common bunch, and neither is this game. Its wacky post-humanist visuals, wacky but unique setting and atmosphere, and the use of the random text generation that occurs through the dialogue makes this one of the best titles that the engine has to offer. The game itself shows that even with something like RPG Maker, you can go out of bounds and make your own settings, your own art styles, and still deliver a product that is truly its own. The sequel game, Hylics 2, is an even more realised version of Hylics 1, powered by Unity and employs 3D into the game as well. But the first game is really cheap to pick up and would recommend trying it out first before buying 2. Also, it's very short, so don't expect JRPG levels of length. Number 15, 77p Eggwife. When it comes to retro shooters, this is one of the most polarizing games I've played in a while. A game that immediately struck me with the reminder of another game that I also love, Postal 2, the ultimate edgelord game that's actually good. But 77p takes the open-ended gameplay of Postal 2 and also adds a lot of abstraction into the world, from weapons to enemies, and even just the way the story unfolds over time. This game is a real treat, especially if you're already into the boomer shooter genre as well as Postal 2. Inspired by other games as well like Duke Nukem and Goat Simulator, your character loses your wife due to private matters going terribly wrong, and now you have to find a new wife, all the while the world is being taken over by milk-obsessed cultists. Beyond that, it's a game you're better off trying for yourself and just see how weird and chaotic the game gets later on. Number 16. Hotline Miami. This game was my personal gateway into the indie scene that made me fall over heels for the scene of games that were bringing back the feeling of making games that were meant to be just that. Hotline Miami, made by Denton Games, pits you in 80s Miami with a character who drives and wears a jacket and a mask that receives strange phone calls that takes into places full of violent mobsters that will shoot you on sight. You're given a weapon and a mask, and you go in clearing entire rooms, all the while listening to that sweet 80s inspired synthwave music to boot. The game is pretty difficult. One hit will kill you and set you back, having to repeat the whole process again until everyone is dead. It's a game that is over 10 years old and is still one of the best indie games ever made, and the sequel more so as well. That will be 10 years old as of 2015. Hotline Miami is a game with a strange story that gets more unsettling and trippy towards the end. But the gameplay and soundtrack is why the game is iconic, and I implore you to pick them both up and play it. Number 17, Post Void. Another fast-paced shooter that joins the list, and it's a more specific type of one too, that revolves around racing against the clock. You hold a head with liquid, and if it goes empty, you die unless you refill it quickly. The game is very fast-paced and you're constantly on the move. Each level has you select a card with different effects that may or may not help you in the next arena. Visuals are very intensive on the eyes though. I was okay with it for a bit, but it's more so the gameplay itself that can be tiring on top of the weird visuals. It's a fun game that I think is best played in short bursts when you want a few quick rounds. Otherwise, it's an intense and engaging shooter with a unique art style coded across the board. Also, when you die, you have to start over, so have fun with that while getting blind. Number 18, Splatter. A game that is all about fingers, without the guns, but all the shooting from your fingers. Splatter, developed by Rat King Collective and Catbird Soft, is a fast-paced shooter with a myriad of visuals and colors that will definitely cause photosensitive issues to someone with a history of epilepsy, something that a lot of these games I mentioned here have in common. You have a variety of finger poses that represent different weapon types and enemies that evolve over time. Gameplay feels solid and the world feels like a fever dream but computated into a 3D based program, like a game basically. Combat is also fairly challenging, where positioning is more important than anything, as is the choice of action. There is a demo currently available for it if you want to try it, but I would recommend reading the description of the game first before diving in. Other than that, definitely worth buying. Number 19, Perfect World. Now I'm going to be honest here, I was pretty lost when I tried out this game the first time, and next to no one has talked about this game. But reading on Phase-In's itch.io page, the game seems to be more of a artistic experience than anything. This game is described as a anti-capitalist platformer. It has some nice environments and visuals, again, but somewhat similar to Cruelty Squad and a little bit more beefy on the graphics. Movement feels smooth and fluid too. You can add mushrooms in the world with your watering pot, destroy capitalist objects, and get money to then buy more of the game's mechanics, including a condo. But the developer is active, and if you have questions or issues with the game, then you can go forward and ask. Still, I would recommend this game as well as checking out some of the other projects made by the developer. Number 20, Disillusion. Personally, I'm not too acquainted with the dungeon crawler genre besides a few games like The Legend of Grimrock, but I know that they're seeing a rise in popularity as of late within the indie scene, with each year releasing more titles. Disillusion is another one to add to the collection, made by Disillusion Dev. Disillusion is sort of like LSD Dream Emulator, but with dungeon crawler gameplay mechanics and a cast of characters that you can actually talk to. Has a fair bit of replayability due to dialogue choices that can lead to different outcomes and different endings too. The graphics are not too far apart from old school dungeon crawler games. This one, however, has more of a surreal and dreamlike approach to its world building, even if it's all within the confines of a large tower. If you're looking for a cheap experimental dungeon crawler to get your fix after The Legend of Grimrock, then Disillusion is worth having a look at. Number 21, Dread Delusion. Now when I first looked at this game, it was like a unholy birth between Morrowind and Majora's Mask, but seeing more of it captivated me nonetheless. Dread Delusion, the game, made by lovely Hellplace, harkens back to the late 90s and early 2000s period of open world RPGs, where it was dialogue heavy, provided freedom and exploration as well as the paths to creating your own character. The visuals themselves bounce from medieval to abstract as you see more of the enemies and the weird characters on top of the presence of large Morrowind-like mushrooms running amok. It's still currently in early access, and me personally, I will be waiting until it comes out so I can get the full RPG experience that's hopefully still being made. But what's already there so far looks really promising still, especially if you're a fan of games like Majora's Mask and Morrowind. Number 22, Gossamer Matrix. Take Cruelty Squad, but instead of the late 90s, early 2000s low poly visuals, give it pixel 3D low poly visuals with bright and in-your-face colors. Gossamer Matrix, made by Cat Milk, looks to be similar but different at the same time. It's an on-rails style shooter with an emphasis on inventory interaction, which means that your weapons and items have to be manually used, with weapons being loaded and reloaded manually, with the use of point and click mechanics. You manage your gear with intent, rather than just pressing R or other buttons to do all the work for you. I really like the art style, and I always like when games apply a pixel art shader over their 3D models or a different kind of shader, making it sort of timeless visually. It's still in development and there's no release date planned, but when that time comes, I will definitely be picking this one up. Number 23, Corporate Lockdown. Now this one's going to be quick because there's no footage to decipher what kind of game it's going to be ultimately, but from the images I'm seeing, it looks to be an immersive sim that's similar to Thief and Deus Ex, but with some weird visuals and a distinct dark palette and atmosphere added to it. And it seems like the game is going to emphasize player freedom, traversing levels with tons of secrets and pathways to navigate through the place. No release date at this time, but look forward to seeing some footage of the game eventually. Number 24, Peripeteia. Another immersive sim game, set in a futuristic Poland in a post-Soviet city, where you'll be facing a range of factions with different ideas and beliefs that want to shape the future in their own way. Peripeteia, the game made by Ninth Exodus, looks to incorporate a mix of RPG, stealth, and action mechanics, all placed into a blender. Normally, I'm not really a stealth person, but I do enjoy games that have an interesting cyberpunk setting, and the immersive sim mechanics look pretty in-depth so far. It's also got that 2000 style graphical look to it that I really like, and I'm glad that we're seeing more of that instead of the PS1 stuff that we already get all the time. No release date yet, but it says it's coming soon, and there is in fact a demo available if you want to play what's already there. Definitely will be keeping an eye out for this one. And finally, number 25, Parkside Decayed Soul Manipulation. A game made by Banana Hardsoft, an immersive sim shooter set in a futuristic California where crime is ripe and society is hitting rock bottom thanks to the meddling of secret societies. You, the character, are a pawn in their grand game. Similar to Peripeteia, you'll have the choice of going about things your own way, as you normally do in immersive sim games. Characters look like they've had a bad trip and environments are run down but interesting enough to warrant exploration. You can utilize stealth-based mechanics or say fuck it and shoot everything on sight. It's really up to you. But it's going to be one of those games that makes you think outside the box and look for unique and alternative ways of completing your objectives. It's scheduled to have a release for some time in 2024, but beyond that, nothing specific has been pointed out or confirmed, so we'll just have to wait and see on this one. And that's about all I have for now. A lot of the games aren't exactly like Cruelty Squad, but in their own unique ways do share a mix of surreal and dreamlike settings with their own methods of gameplay and storytelling. Games that have a unorthodox setting often make for the most interesting experiences that delve into more abstract thoughts and feelings that reside in people. Some are more visually similar to Cruelty Squad, some are immersive sims like Cruelty Squad, but the rest are of different genres and do their own thing basically. When you know where to look, you'd be surprised as to what kind of projects you can find out there, the ones that don't get talked about enough, that deserve more attention than they're getting. At any rate, I hope you've all found something up your alley here, and if you're somewhat disappointed that there really isn't anything at all exactly like Cruelty Squad out there, then I understand why. In saying that though, the developer of Cruelty Squad is in fact making another game that shares similar themes to Cruelty Squad but is going to be its own thing entirely, and is going to be different from Cruelty Squad, called Psycho Patrol R. Don't worry, even though the game is nowhere near finished, it's coming soon. Stay tuned, and thank you for watching.
Shit, how's the rest of it go? Hello? Vote yes in the Brexit 2.0 referendum. Fuck planet Earth!